The last big social change of the 1970s actually is kind of surrounds not just a small group of people, but all of these groups that we've already talked about, and many, many more. Because what we're going to see finally emerge in the 1970s is the beginnings of the modern environmental movement and concerns over nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy, doesn't that stuff make you have like 6 heads?
Well, it can be a little bit dangerous, Ella, but we'll take a look at what that means. So, this environmental movement that starts in the 1960s and 70s, how does it get its start? It gets its start with this thing right down here that I'm going to be highlighting my cursor on. This stuff is getting sprayed out of a bin, and it's whoosh, it's a powder, and it gets sprayed onto the crops. And in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, this stuff was sprayed everywhere, man. You would see it sprayed on kids at the pool who happened to be at the community pool, and they were spraying the grass. You would see kids, using it at their homes. My father used this stuff in the 1980s. I had no idea this, but he had a gigantic bag of this stuff that he had laying around from the 1970s because it never went bad. And he would have me scoop out handfuls of it and sprinkle it on the yard. It's a pesticide. It's called DDT, and it kills pests. It's also highly poisonous. Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate you letting me play with DDT as a kid. Explains some things, doesn't it?
What do you mean your daddy let you use pesticides that were dangerous?
Be quiet, Ella. The kids are wondering what I'm talking about. We'll do more with that tomorrow. But Americans, when they realize how dangerous pesticides are, thanks to books like Silent Spring and other books that come out in the 1970s, they begin to take a broader look at what's happening in our environment. There are, all of a sudden in America, it comes to a crisis point. In the 1970s, there's a series of kind of disasters. You couldn't swim offshore in New York State or New Jersey. You were unable to enter the rivers in Massachusetts and Ohio and Pennsylvania in places. The Bay in Maryland had become uninhabitable for lots of different creatures. Large fish kills were happening. And we begin to realize these environmental disasters are going to be a problem. Whether it's air pollution, like you can see here with smog, or even in its utmost worst, the greatest natural disaster of the 1970s, which would be this place right here. This is right outside Niagara Falls, New York State. This is a housing development called Love Canal. And this actually here, this little section right here, this is the ruins of an old canal that used to be in place. And the company that owned it was a chemical company, and they sold the land to the school district. You can see part of the canal here, and it stretches right there. The school district bought it for $1, which wasn't bad. Unfortunately, there were 22,000 gallons of toxic waste buried haphazardly in that canal, and the building of all of these houses ruptured all of this inappropriately stored chemical waste, causing catastrophic numbers of birth defects and leukemia and miscarriages. And one poor girl had, I think, 12 different birth defects, increased rates of intellectual disability. It was a disaster. It was a terrible place. In fact, we had to actually move all of these people out of the Love Canal, and it took until 2004 to clean up all 22,000 gallons of waste. That's 50 years it took us from when this place stopped being dumped, 1954, to when we actually got it cleaned up, to get all that waste removed. So we begin to see people across the country with their health problems because of underground toxic waste. And of course, right now in Cleveland, we have issues with lead poisoning in the water. And really, citizens start to think that it's time to protect the environment. And so the question then becomes, well, how do you do that? And the answer there is you pass laws that are going to help our environment. And on this slide, there are 4 different laws that are successful in reducing smog and helping our bodies of water recover and our land recover. First thing that we do is we pass a law that creates the Environmental Protection Agency, and that was Richard Nixon's doing. He helps create that agency, and its goal is to keep an eye on the environment and fix it if it's busted. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, these are both Endangered Species Act. These are passed the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and their goal there is to clean up these important components of our environment and to protect fragile environments that might otherwise be in danger. And as a result, we have much better public health. Of course, the current global crisis isn't clean air, clean water, or endangered species, it's global warming. So we'll see what our government will do in the future to handle that. The last big thing I want to take a look at here right now would be nuclear energy. And a lot of people in the 1960s and 70s said nuclear energy is the way to go, man. It does not give air pollution, it's not a fossil fuel, it's cleaner, it's less expensive. The problem, of course, is what happens if it breaks, right? What happens if, when we are looking at this nuclear energy, something goes wrong, and then there is a disaster at the facility, and everyone ends up being poisoned with nuclear waste. And that's exactly what happened with 3 Mile Island reactor number 2. And the idea here is that this is the reactor right in the middle, and then there is water that is pumped into the core that keeps it cool, and then the water goes through and it cools down, and then it gets pumped back in, and then it keeps the reactor core cool. Problem was the water wasn't reaching the reactor core because it was leaking off, and the end result is that there was a very slight amount of leakage of radioactive waste into the air. Very low levels of radiation, but people freaked out because what happens if something worse occurred? The residents were evacuated. That's why we have air silence where we teach right now. Obviously, 3 Mile Island is like 10 miles away, from where we are. But as a result, in the coming years, 60 power plants are going to be shut down. And we're not going to open any new ones because of fears over nuclear waste and nuclear accidents. But what you need to know is that here's the scary thing. It has been almost 50 years since 3 Mile Island. But at the same time, most of these facilities haven't gone through any major upgrades. So they're using technology that is, nearly half a century old. It's pretty crazy. So this debate continues about, should we update these facilities, shouldn't we? Lots of people question what we should do. And we'll talk more about that in class tomorrow.